is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas, and established it upon the rivers. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts, he is the King of glory. As we come to episode 31 of our look at the Psalms, we come to these fantastic verses that we find in the 24th Psalm, which opens with almost like a declaration about something of the goodness and the nature and the power of God, but also the splendor of his creation. The words that we read there are, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and the world and those who dwell therein. And as we'll see, that is an incredibly all-inclusive phrase, isn't it? Not just the earth and the fullness, but everything, all who dwell therein. That's a powerful statement. And it closes with, for he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. And in this episode, I would want to go through the whole of the 24th Psalm, but I really can't get past those opening two verses because they say three very important things. First of all, they say something very important about God, and that is the sovereignty of God, the power of God, if you like. They also say something very important about our planet. It is incredibly valuable. It is an incredibly precious thing. We don't need to watch a documentary or read something by David Attenborough to appreciate that the planet we live on is mysteriously beautiful, but also incredibly, intrinsically valuable. And the third thing these two verses tell us is something very important about ourselves. There is responsibility to this beauty. There is accountability, there is recall to this sovereignty. We cannot just do our own thing. And so we're going to explore that a little bit. And I might move around a few locations just to give you an idea. But here I am in just the other side of Bursko, and just capturing some of this fabulous natural beauty, which pales into insignificance compared to some of the natural beauty sites in the world. But it does again just remind me that I live under the hand of a God who is mighty and sovereign and powerful. Those opening verses give me something of the scope and the breadth of God's power, doesn't it? When it says the earth is the Lord's, that's incredible. That's not just like saying the car is mine, the house is mine, this land is mine, this cattle are mine, you know, that mansion. These things are such small and puny things compared to being able to say the earth and all that is in it, the fullness thereof is mine. You get an understanding that not only is God all powerful, but you also get what is the organizing principle on which our world is run. Sometimes we're tempted to think that the world is organized by kings, and you go back over the centuries, it seemed that kings were the prominent ones. Today we sometimes think politicians are the ones who call the shots and make the choices, or more than that, you know, oil barons or maybe sultans and all these people who hold significant places and have got the wealth to back that up. We sometimes can be mistaken in thinking that they hold some kind of controlling aspect over the world, but they don't. This world isn't regulated by scientists or medical experts, and in recent days with the pandemic we've experienced, we're prone to just hang on the coattails of any medical expert who can tell us a better way forward, if you like, tempted to think that perhaps the world and its fate just hangs in the hands of those with certificates and medical degrees. This verse is a timely reminder to say, whoa, wait a minute. As valuable as all these people are, politicians and kings and medical experts and scientists, and they are valuable people, they do not hold the key to life and to this earth and to our continuation and to the quality of life that we live. It is in the hands of God, and this verse reminds us of that. But it also reminds us that our kind of influence on this planet is limited. We are not land owners. We are land loaners. We're only loaning this space from God. Sooner or later, you and I will have to exit this place. So we're only on loan with the Father. In fact, Charles Spurgeon of this psalm said this: man is but a tenant at will, a leaseholder upon the most precarious tenure, liable to instantaneous ejectment, which is a bit of a stronger way to put what I've just said, really. The earth is the Lord is a precarious statement, but it's also a profoundly securing statement. It's precarious because we are never full owners of what we're enjoying. As we've just said, this isn't something that we can negotiate terms about. We can't say to God, okay, I'm going to negotiate how long my life is going to be. I want to, if you like, make a few demands that you can consider. I want to draw up a contract that might help me kind of state where I would like to live and what I want to do with my life. We realize that we are very precarious in our position as a bargaining entity, if you like, because we don't own this stuff. God can claim it back at any moment. The Bible says the earth is the Lord's. It's not somebody else's. It's not a third party's. It's not a guy I'm trying to compete with. It's God himself. And at any given time, yes, I can be instantaneously ejected, as Spurgeon said. But also it's profoundly secure because, of course, when you look at the planet that we live on and the news that we hear daily, we can be tempted to feel that we're in a very dangerous place, can't we? You know, the earth seems to be so polluted and destructive forces within it. The news always seems to be bad news. Well, the securing element is that God's still in control, that the overall health of our planet, the future of our planet, is not in the hands of a few protesting kind of Greenpeaces, if you like, as wonderful as some of the statements are they come out with. It's more than that. It's not entirely in my hands or your hands to make these things happen. God has commissioned us, of course, to be stewards and to care for it responsibly, and we're going to look at that in the last part of this episode. But right from the get-go, we need to appreciate that God is in control, and at given points, whenever he feels it necessary, God will readdress the balance. Let me give you an example. We're all very aware of the 70-year exile that Israel and Judah experienced at the hands of Assyria and Babylon. Some commentators have reflected and said that that amount of years was precisely the amount of years owed to the land for its Sabbath rest. Isn't that an unusual thought? You read in Scripture, and of course in Exodus 23, God commanded that the 7th year, Israel were not to work the land. They worked it for 6, and that God would give them a bumper crop in the 6th year so that they would not have to work it the 7th year. They would have enough to tide them over, and then they would begin work again on year 1, and the cycle would continue. But they abused that. They flogged and exhausted the land. And so to readdress the natural balance of the world, God took opportunity to rest the land for these Sabbaths that it had missed. Now, it's a theory, it's a thought. A lot of commentators would say it's very obvious, and that's what you should be drawing as one of the key conclusions. It wasn't the reason why Israel went into exile. God didn't say, look, the land needs a rest, so I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just put you guys into exile. No, they repeatedly disobeyed God and floundered his rules and commands. That's why they ended up in exile. But one of the byproducts of that exile was rest to the land. God took a moment, if you like, to bring a much needed rest and revigoration and restoration period, if you like, into a land that was desperately in need of it. So the earth is the Lord's, is this huge statement made in this psalm. It just screams the sovereignty and the power of God, because earth is all inclusive, isn't it? That's everything. It's not like saying this area is mine, and you could say, well, what do you mean by this area? Does it include that area that's near it? Does it include that one that touches onto it? But when you say the earth, you're basically saying there's nothing excluded. Everything is God's. And if there's any doubt at all, he goes on to say, the psalmist, and the fullness thereof, just in case you didn't get the word earth, meaning the whole earth. Do you remember when Kings Solomon and Hezekiah had their proud moment? Solomon is entertained as the Queen of Sheba visits, and she says at the end of her visit with Solomon, after seeing all the splendor of you, what you have, and the way your servants are dressed, and the ample provisions of your hospitality, she's convinced that, I've only ever heard half has only been told. And Hezekiah likewise, when he gets the envoys coming and visit him, he says he showed them everything within his palace. It's mine, he said. And it's almost like God's waving his hand across the entire planet saying, mine. This is everything that I owe. This is everything that is good and everything that is right. This is where it's a powerful thought for each of us to appreciate that this verse, first and foremost, says something about God, his power and his sovereignty. If this fabulous verse tells us something about God, his sovereignty and his power, it also says something about this fabulous planet of ours. It speaks of its value. I don't know if you're a football fan, I am, and my club recently has been in huge conversations and debate trying to sign a world superstar, or at least an up-and-coming one. The price tag has been set by a German club of some 120 million euros, and at the moment they're still bartering away to try and come to some kind of an agreement. And yet, interestingly enough, as the pundits have reflected on this deal, inevitably you get those saying, there is no way on earth this man is worth that much money, and others are saying, no, in years to come he's going to be a superstar, he ought to be paid that much and bought that much. But the interesting thing is this, my club haven't set the value on this guy. The current club he's with have set the value because they own him in the correct way. You understand what I mean? Not own as in literally own the guy, but they own his professional life and that sphere at the moment. They have the privilege to set the fee. They call the value of the player because it's their player. And I think when you look at something of the world around us and you look at something of this planet of ours, you begin to understand that the inestimable value of our planet is largely because of who owns it, whose planet it is. This is not something that's just owned by a multi-corp company or just someone who's important or some billionaire. It's owned by God himself. It's the position, it's the prestige, it's the character of the owner that breathes life and value into what is owned. And so when you look at the earth and you look at this wonderful planet, it reflects something of the heart of God. It's the owner who is determining the value and places the fantastic wealth that we see around us. It's not the acquirer. It's not someone who's looking to buy the player. It's not someone who's looking to live in the planet. It's not somebody who wants to draw from its natural resources, who set the value of this planet. It's God himself. In fact, when we look in Genesis 1 and verse 31, it tells us that, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And it's the first time you really get a divine opinion on what has been put together. God said it is very good. God was proud of it. God was in love with it because he's infused this earth with part of himself. If you look around you and you see the trees and the hills and the lakes and the valleys and all the precious things we see in this earth, you begin to appreciate that they are fantastically valued because God is in them. Now, this isn't a pantheistic way of looking at life, and there are those who say God is the tree and God is the field, and they give the earth a sense of divinity. That's not what we're saying. The essence of God is not in a tree, it's not in a field, it's not in the beauty we see around us, but the reflection of God, the nature of God, the characteristics of God live in those things. In the same way, we are said to be created in the image of God. The essence of God isn't in me or you, but we are reflections of that essence. We have something about us, an expression, a character expression is to be found in our own lives. Now, those who have a mind for art will appreciate that kind of analogy, because of course you take one look at a Lowry or a classic Van Gogh, if you like, or a Rembrandt, or even a Caravaggio. You look at some of those fantastic artists, and I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination, but I do appreciate a good piece of art, and there are very few times I can tell you straight away who painted that. Most of the time I can't, but there are those who could, and the reason they can is because the artist's heart and mind and expression and burden and passion and philosophy is portrayed through that brushstroke. It's portrayed through what they see and do, and that's the important part about it. In the same way, when we look at this fabulous earth of ours, we're getting that understanding. The earth is the Lord. It's telling us that it's capturing something of the character and the nature and the heart of God. When we look around us, we see this. What we see is part of the mind of God. It's probably part of the heart of God. You look at the complexity of a flower that perhaps no one's going to see. You ever seen these nature programs that go into great detail about an insect and the intricacy of that insect, and you think, what's the point? No one's ever going to come across that insect. It takes a whole camera crew specifically looking for it to unearth it after however long they've been looking. You look at a wonderful landscape or a fantastic mountain, and you appreciate that you're not just looking at beauty, you're looking at an element, you're looking at a reflection of God, you're looking at something that's important, that reflects something of the Creator. And that's what we see. Our planet is valuable beyond price, if you like, because it's God's. In fact, in Psalm 19 it says the earth is his handiwork. That's a wonderful phrase. It reflects God's work. He conceived it, he planned it, he crafted it, if you like, he produced it. It is a living entity that reflects everything about him. Back in 1913, there was a company called the Pequot Auto Supply House. They ran an advert for their particular auto company, and on the advert appeared the catchphrase that said, "One look is worth 1,000 words." It coined the phrase over the years, "A picture paints 1,000 words." You know, that kind of phrase. The idea that there are some things in life that so arrest you at first glance that 1,000 words of explanation would never substitute, would never even come close to giving you the information that a single look can offer. This planet, I think, captures very much that, the ethos of that thought. Everywhere around us, it reflects something of the heart of God more than 1,000 words would. This psalm is wonderful. This verse is powerful because it reflects something of the sovereignty of God, of the power of God. It also reflects something of the value of this planet. And thirdly and finally, this verse, this wonderful statement, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and everything in the world, if you like, says a great deal about us. It tells of our responsibility. It eulogizes over the sovereignty of God. It celebrates the value of the planet. But then it gets really gritty and earthy and challenging because it talks about our responsibility to that great privilege that we've been given. When we read the earth is the Lord's, it means that we are not free to do with this planet as we please. When we read words like the earth is the Lord's, it means that we carry a responsibility for its upkeep, for its welfare. We see this in the beginning of Genesis, where God instructs Adam to care for the planet and the garden. He was not left to do as he pleased with it. There were certain responsibilities that came, that attended that great privilege. The earth is the Lord. It means that I cannot place indiscriminate value on humankind. It is not up to me to determine who is worthy and who isn't, who is valuable and who isn't, and how topical that understanding is, particularly as we have witnessed over these recent weeks and months the whole kind of drive and protest about Black Lives Matter. We understand that because the earth is the Lord's, it's not up to me to say who matters and who doesn't. It's not up to me to place more value on one than the other. We live in a world where God has called us to see the intrinsic value of every individual, because that's our onus. Every time we deface that planet, every time we kind of betray that commission, that honor, we do God a disservice. And that is as much as dropping litter on the floor or graffitiing on a wall can be as serious and as defacing as being impolite and discriminate and racist towards others. They are all bundled together in a way of saying, I'm dishonoring the stewardship that God has called me to execute. Our reactions, if you like, to individuals, whether they're good or bad, are not based on the individuals themselves. We cannot look and say, well, that person acted that way, they deserve to be criticized, condemned, or in any way abused. And this has been the way that wars have been started, because one country believes another country acted untoward and unjustly and wrongly, and so therefore it qualifies them to respond violence with violence. But we have to lift our sights higher when we look at how we respond to humanity, to one another, because we have to look higher to God, that He is our accountability. This isn't that you mistreated me, therefore I'm going to mistreat you. No. This isn't that you're arrogant and you're difficult, so therefore it's okay if I treat you less than another person. That arrogant and difficult person is still carrying the image of God. They are still molded in that image. They are an intrinsic sense of God's value. And because of that, I'm not free, if you like, to condemn with impunity. I'm not free. I have no right to return hatred for hatred. If somebody expresses an arrogancy towards me, it is not therefore my right to be as arrogant back. If somebody does me a disservice, I am not qualified under heaven to then go and respond with an equally difficult disservice. And some would quote eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But you understand that that commandment was given to moderate violence, not to encourage violence. Because in Old Testament times, if you stole someone's cattle, they would return and steal yours and kill a few more and possibly even attack your family. They were extortionate responses to crimes committed against them. And in order to regulate that and to show more balance and a sense of understanding and love, God said, I'm going to limit the theft of an eye for an eye and no more. But we have taken that to mean it's okay to retaliate in whatever way we see fit and pleased. And that is not the scriptural kind of emphasis that it's always sought upon on it. We are called constantly to recognize the sacredness of human nature and the sacredness of individuals. We live in a world that God Himself has deemed very good, a world that He loves. And don't forget, when God said very good, it was immediately following the creation of humans. Up to then, He created this wonderful planet and said, this is good. But when He created mankind and placed them in this wonderful planet, He said, this is very good. God places high value on earth, on humans, on this planet that we live in. Everything we enjoy in it, the parks that we stroll on, the mountains, the hills, the seas we swim in, these are God's, they're not mine, and they need to be treated with the utmost respect and honor because they're His. I can remember a few years ago, my family went to stay at a friend's apartment. And I'm saying apartment, that's an understatement. It was a luxurious apartment right on the River Thames in central London. And it was the first time we got to stay there. And I can still see it now, as our children were a little younger then. We all sat down in the front room and my wife read the riot act to our kids. Don't touch this, don't move that, make sure you always take your shoes off, make sure you don't make a mess of this. We were so kind of preoccupied with keeping this place as pristine as we'd found it, and it was pristine. But largely because it's not ours. We're only using it. This is somebody else's place. You treat it with honor. And the somebody else wasn't just simply an unknown person who we rented it from for whatever. It was a good friend of my wife's, still a good friend of my wife's. And so because we knew the person and we had a connection with them, we were doubly careful not to want to spoil what they've allowed us the privilege to enjoy. This world does not belong to a stranger. It belongs to our Heavenly Father. We have a responsibility to treat it with honor. We have a responsibility to treat it with dignity and respect. It is our call to be those to not just respect what we see and the kind of the planet around us, but the people that live in it. This is something that God has called us to. And in our current fragile climate that we live in, our drive to honor, to respect, to love others is not driven by social injustice, as bad as that is. It's not saying, well, we need to love others because they've had crime committed against them, or we need to love others because there's so many people out there protesting this and we need to join those voices and love others with them. Our primary motive is we love others because they are created equally, valuably, tremendously worthy in the presence of God. They carry God's image. God Himself places on each of us the responsibility to be our brother's keeper, to love even the worst. When Jesus said love your enemies, He was going to the extreme. What's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is you're called upon to love someone who could be classified as an enemy. That is so much of the value. So therefore, when I look at all these things, when I look at my obligation to embrace the other, I appreciate that I am not free to hold my own opinion on my fellow man. It's not for me to say to God, listen, God, I will love people, but there are certain people I will not love. I'm going to have an opinion on that, and I'm going to say that's okay. I have a right to do that. It's not simply a matter of personal choice, whether I hate, whether I condemn, whether I dismiss people, whether I just move them out of the way. If you like, ours is not a call to be indifferent to certain people. You see, those of us who love others, oftentimes we love our family and the nice people to us, and that's an easy way to love, isn't it? But trying to love the arrogant and the difficult and the obnoxious, all that is extremely difficult. But my call, your call as children of God, is not to remain indifferent to certain people. We can't just draw a line across the pain of certain people because they're not very nice and say, well, that's irrelevant whether they're in pain or not. But if anybody else is in pain, I'll give them my care and attention. We can't just dismiss pain. We can't just be flippant about the hurts of others because, we don't particularly like them. God has put His image even in the most stubbornly aggravating people. Even in the most difficult people, God has put His image. This is why we are called to love this earth, because the earth is the Lord's. Everyone who dwells in it is God's. And because it's God's, it's of incredible, unspeakable value. So can I challenge you, is next time you take a walk in the countryside and see the magnificence of this creation, stop and think, this is the sovereignty of God. He owns this. He controls this. He regulates this. Stop and think, this is incredibly valuable. I could not purchase something as valuable as the natural world around me. But then pause with that sober contemplation. I have a responsibility in this, not just to keep my planet tidy, not just to do what I can to help my planet, but to love the people in it that are equally God's. Love the people who bear His image. And as we do that, we really do start to glorify God. God bless you.